It was an ordinary morning when a man, seemingly dirty and poorly dressed, walked into a luxury jewelry store, only to be quickly dismissed with suspicious looks. The staff, accustomed to serving impeccably dressed clients, didn't hesitate to make assumptions. It wasn't the first time they had seen someone like him, but contrary to what many might expect, he wasn't financially destitute. The mere fact that he looked unkempt was enough for him to be treated as undesirable. It may seem simple, but when we take a moment to reflect, we realize how many similar stories surround us, often unnoticed, yet heavy with judgment. However, the situation reveals a prejudice that goes beyond merely judging someone by their appearance. The man, humiliated, didn't react. He knew this was just a small glimpse of what many endure every day. Class prejudice is a silent force, woven into society in many subtle ways, and it isn't always as explicit as we think. For instance, who hasn't been treated differently because of how they looked or what they wore? The problem is, we rarely stop to consider that a single glance, a word, can deeply affect someone's life. This type of prejudice creates invisible barriers that leave lasting scars. But what really happens when someone is judged like that? The impact doesn't end with the moment of humiliation. It lingers, often affecting the self-esteem and confidence of the person targeted. The employee's action, taken without even questioning the man's intentions, was a reflection of a system that values appearance over essence. The stories we build about people are often based on our limited view of the world and what we deem acceptable. And this notion, that someone is less capable or worthy because of how they look, is one of the greatest challenges we must overcome as a society. The man who had been turned away from the jewelry store was not who everyone thought he was. Behind the appearance of a beggar, he hid a completely different identity. He was a billionaire investor, owner of successful companies, who had deliberately chosen to disguise himself as poor to test society. His goal wasn't to be recognized, but to understand how people react when they judge others based solely on appearance, without knowing the truth. He knew that the reality of who he was far more complex than any assumption that could be made based on the clothes he wore. This decision to hide behind a false image was not just an experiment. For the man, it was a powerful lesson he was trying to learn, and perhaps even teach. How often do we rely on first impressions? How many stories does society construct about people simply because we don't have access to their full reality? By dressing as a beggar, he was forcing people to reflect on how quick judgment can become a prison for those who are subjected to it. He wanted to prove that no matter how much someone has, or seems to have, their worth should never be defined by their appearance or bank account. If it were an experiment, it would be one of the most eye-opening anyone could conduct. Imagine a billionaire with the power to buy anything, making himself invisible, appearing as someone who lives on the margins. What he learned in that jewelry store was a painful but essential lesson. The world often forgets to see the human being behind the image. This reflection goes far beyond mere appearances. It challenges the way we perceive what is truly valuable in people and what makes us trust or distrust someone. After being humiliated at the jewelry store, the man could have responded with anger or revenge, but he chose something deeper: reflection. Through his experience, though painful, was an opportunity to understand what drives people to judge others based on something as superficial as appearance. What the employee didn't know was that he was being observed by someone with the power to completely change the course of that situation. What seemed like a simple rejection, without apparent reason, led the beggar to question what remained of humanity in the people around him. Humiliation is a difficult experience for anyone, but it can also be a powerful source of learning. When the man was turned away, he didn't just see the rudeness of the clerk, he saw the reflection of a system that values image more than character. He realized this kind of judgment wasn't an exception, but a common reality affecting countless people. Have you ever stopped to think about how many stories are built from a look, a gesture, an attitude? Appearance often holds more power than essence, and that's a problem we must face as a society. And while reflecting on this, the man realized something even greater. This experience wasn't just about him. It was about all of us, about how we construct our own stories about others, based only on what we see. He didn't feel anger toward the clerk, but compassion, knowing that many are enslaved by these preconceived notions. And it was in that moment of humiliation that he realized true transformation wouldn't come from his response to the situation, but from the impact he could create by making the right choices from that point forward. The next day, the beggar returned to the jewelry store, but this time, he was no longer the dirty, disregarded man. He walked in as the owner of the luxury chain, radiating power and confidence. The contrast between his appearance and his true identity left everyone in the store speechless. The clerk who had turned him away the day before now stared at him in surprise and confusion. He didn't know what to do, while the man, with a subtle smile, made a point of confronting him. He wasn't there to flaunt his wealth, but to teach a valuable lesson about respect and judgment. The beggar's stance, now the store's owner, was strategic. He knew the impact of that moment wouldn't be limited to the clerk, it would resonate with everyone who witnessed it. His intention was simple: to make people reflect on how they treat others, especially those who, at first glance, may not seem worthy of respect. He didn't want revenge, but real change in the mindset of people like the clerk, who judge without knowing. By doing this, he was also challenging society to confront the invisible prejudices embedded in our daily actions. By confronting the clerk, the beggar was also opening the door to a deeper reflection about the stories we tell about others, stories based on what we see, not who they are. He wanted the clerk to understand that his actions didn't just disrespect another human being. They revealed a belief system where someone's worth is tied to their appearance or bank balance. True transformation begins when we stop judging and start respecting everyone's dignity, regardless of their social status or looks. And it was in that moment, with power in hand, that the beggar began to sow the change he so deeply desired. The clerk, who had acted so confidently when turning the beggar away, was now speechless, completely thrown off by the revelation of who the man really was. The shock was visible on his face. He tried to explain himself, but his words came out jumbled and weak. He didn't know what to say or how to justify the mistake he had made. The man, now wealthy and powerful, watched it all with impressive calm, not showing anger or seeking revenge, but with a quiet firmness that pierced the clerk's soul. His reaction wasn't one of bitterness, but of a lesson that needed to be learned. That uncomfortable moment showed the clerk that he had fallen into an invisible trap of prejudice. He believed he was doing the right thing by judging someone based on appearance, without realizing he had been the one truly disrespected. The beggar had no reason to apologize. He had done nothing wrong. On the contrary, it was the clerk who needed to understand the gravity of his actions. It was as if the beggar had deliberately turned that moment of discomfort into an opportunity for the clerk and everyone around to reflect on how much prejudice shapes our behavior and prevents us from seeing the true value in people. That moment was a turning point for the clerk. He realized that by judging someone based on appearance, he wasn't just being unfair. He was contributing to a culture that places people into narrow boxes without giving space for their real stories. The beggar, by not responding with hostility, allowed the clerk to see the truth in front of him. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of appearance or financial status. That uncomfortable moment wasn't just about the clerk. It was about society as a whole, and how prejudice can be destructive and limiting even to those who unknowingly carry it. With the impact of the revelation still echoing through the store, the beggar, now the owner, immediately took steps to transform the environment and create a culture of respect and inclusion. He knew that meaningful change doesn't come from words alone, but through concrete action. He implemented a set of policies starting with staff training to ensure every customer was treated with dignity, regardless of appearance or social standing. The store's new philosophy wasn't just about selling luxury items, but about honoring the human being in their entirety. He wanted to make sure no one else would be judged based on what they wore or how they looked. Moreover, the beggar made it a point to turn the store into an accessible space for everyone. He understood that true luxury lies not only in expensive products, but in how people feel when they walk through the door. He instituted changes that improved the customer experience and promoted empathy and inclusion. He wanted everyone, no matter their background, to feel they could walk in and be treated with respect, without feeling small or judged. The jewelry store, once a symbol of exclusivity, now became a place of transformation, where people's stories would be heard and valued. The true lesson in humility came from his decision to spark change not only in the store, but in society. The beggar understood that the power to transform reality didn't lie solely in material wealth, but in his ability to influence others positively. By fostering an inclusive and respectful environment, he wasn't just changing a business, he was setting off a ripple effect, one that would spread far beyond the store's walls. This lesson in humility was not an act of charity. It was a strategic transformation meant to reshape the stories we tell about each other based on what we see. The story of the beggar who became the owner of a jewelry store invites us to reflect deeply on society's values. How often do we judge others solely based on appearance? Perhaps it's with a quick glance on the street, a dismissive gesture, or even upon hearing someone's name and instantly associating it with a social class or economic background. What the beggar did, returning to the store and revealing his true identity, forced us to confront a hard truth. We're often more concerned with how someone looks or behaves than with who they truly are. This culture of superficial judgment affects not only individuals, but undermines the building of a more just and equal society. When the beggar walked into that store, dirty and poorly dressed, he didn't just represent someone in financial difficulty. He embodied everyone who has been marginalized for not fitting society's aesthetic standards. But by revealing who he truly was, he made us ask, how much are we willing to lose in the name of appearances? Is someone truly less capable or less valuable because they are going through a hard time or don't fit the stereotypes we impose? The story isn't just about what happened in that store. It's a deeper invitation to reflect on our own prejudices and attitudes, often rooted in superficial values taught to us from a young age. Change begins when we become aware of how these attitudes affect our lives and the lives of others. How can we learn to see the human being behind the clothes, behind the life choices, not just the label society assigns? The beggar showed us, in a strategic and wise way, that true transformation happens when we begin to look beyond appearances and start honoring everyone's dignity. This kind of change must be cultivated not only in companies or luxury stores, but in society as a whole. The stories we tell one another must become more human, more inclusive, and far less based on prejudiced judgment. The clerk, who had initially acted with such contempt, went through a deep internal transformation. After being confronted by the beggar, now revealed as the store's owner, he could no longer deny the mistake he had made. The weight of his actions began to settle in his heart, and shame was inevitable. He realized that by judging someone based on appearance, he wasn't just disrespecting them. He was perpetuating a cycle of discrimination and exclusion. What once seemed like a simple interaction became a life lesson he would never forget. The humiliation he felt was not something to avoid, but something he needed to internalize in order to grow as a human being. Instead of becoming defensive and justifying his actions, the clerk took a rare and courageous step. He offered a sincere apology. He realized that in order to truly change, he had to own his mistake and learn from it. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but what followed was a genuine shift in how he viewed others. He began to understand that everyone carries a story far beyond what the surface reveals. And this new understanding transformed not only his professional behavior, but his personal interactions as well. This redemption wasn't just about saying sorry. It was about internalizing the lesson the beggar had so personally and powerfully delivered. From that moment forward, the clerk began to act with more empathy, respect, and understanding. He became a champion of the belief that appearance should never be grounds for judgment. More importantly, he became an example of how true transformation begins within us, when we are able to recognize our faults and choose to act differently. Like him, all of us can learn to look beyond appearances and treat others with more humanity. And became a symbol of social transformation. What seemed like a small incident in a luxury store became a story that touched thousands, sparking widespread reflection on class and appearance-based prejudice. That simple exchange, starting with a rushed judgment and ending with a powerful lesson in dignity, resonated across society. The story spread as a clear example of how biased attitudes can be turned into a powerful lesson in humanity. And the impact was felt not only in the jewelry store, but in a broader movement toward inclusion and the valuing of human beings beyond appearances. The story's impact was profound, prompting many to question the stories they create about others based on surface-level judgments. Suddenly, what was once common practice, judging someone by their clothing or background, was seen through a different lens. What had once seemed insignificant became a powerful lesson in how we can transform society, starting with small, everyday actions. The beggar, unintentionally, became the catalyst for a silent revolution that touched everyone who heard his story and chose to reflect on their own biases. The movement that emerged from this case was far more than an individual reflection. It inspired many companies to review their inclusion and customer service policies and led to a shift in how people viewed empathy and mutual respect. The story was shared on various platforms, discussed in public debates, and even integrated into social awareness campaigns. This type of change, though often quiet, has the power to shape the future, transforming the stories we tell each other into something more just, inclusive, and deeply human. The example of the beggar and the jewelry store became a symbol of change, showing that no matter how hard it may be, it is possible to break down the barriers of prejudice and build a space where everyone can be seen and respected for who they truly are.